Hey everybody, John Brown here with another card game review this time. And today I'll be reviewing Star Realms, the small little deck building card game set in space. So you might say, another deck builder? Well, this game isn't exactly entirely original, but it does have some interesting concepts, and I obviously thought it was worth checking out. And now I'd be happy to show you what I think about it. It's a pretty simple game to learn how to play, so let me show you that real quick, and then we'll get to what I think about what this game was able to accomplish, and if it was able to set itself apart from all the other deck builders out there. Alright, whenever you start Star Realms, each player is going to start with these same cards. You're going to start with 8 of these Scouts and 2 of these Vipers. These symbols are pretty simple. This is going to be 1 attack, and then this is going to be 1 what they call trade value to allow you to buy more cards. The first player will draw 3 from their deck, and then every round thereafter, every player will draw 5. With your trade value, you can of course purchase any of the cards out in the table. There's always going to be 5 cards available. If you had 5 value and you bought one of these, then the next one would come out and be available to buy. These are always going to be available to buy, these Explorers. They are, a lot of games have, Acolytes or whatever game you're playing that has these cards always available, and in general they're going to give you 2 money. They also have a different ability at the bottom there we'll get to in just a second. So you can always buy one of these or any of these cards here. You can buy as many as you want on your turn. They'll of course go into your discard pile, and when your cards are out you'll shuffle up your discard pile and draw from there, like just about every other deck builder out there. Now, the things about these cards, though, is that they're all going to have a main ability. So this card here will give you 1 trade and allow you to draw a card. And then they're also going to have potentially other abilities. That symbol we saw before on that Explorer. And then also abilities that trigger based on the faction of cards you have out. So this ability here with this little trash can that we saw on the Explorer on this survey ship, well, they allow you to trash a card. Now, normally if you trash a card, it goes away from the game entirely, so you have a separate sort of trash pile from cards that are gone from the game. What's nice is that you can use your abilities on your card before you trash them. So you can get 1 trade value and draw a card and then trash the card. But then, this card that you purchased earlier in the game is gone. These Explorers, they're great early game because they're going to give you money, and then at some point when you decide you want to thin your deck out a little bit and you want to be able to purchase better cards, or maybe you want to get rid of a card an opponent has out, you can get its 2 monetary value, and the main ability on a card is going to trigger as soon as you play it. Any other abilities you can trigger at any point on your turn. So this can give you 2 attack on your turn, and then you can trash it. Now these cards, however, when they get trashed, will go back into the Explorer pile. So there's 10 in there, and then anytime somebody trashes one, it'll go back in there, and there'll be more available. This ability, though, this kind of faction ability here, means if you have another card of that type, you get to trigger that ability. So this card is a pretty powerful one here. It's going to give me 7 attack. It costs 6 to purchase it. But if I have another blob, this is the blob here, this kind of green faction. If I have another card of that type, it will also allow me to acquire any ship without paying its cost and put it on top of my deck. So that's a pretty neat ability. We've talked about what the attack symbol is, what the trade symbol is. And we've talked about triggering faction abilities and the trash symbol, how that works. The only symbol we haven't talked about is this green symbol here, and that's authority. Each player is going to start the game with 50 authority, and the game provides all of these cards, and they're 2-sided, so 20s and 10s, and then 5s and 1s, so you can flip them, trade them in order to keep track of your health whenever a player damages you or when you gain life back. You can go over 50 life or 50 authority. Now I tend to use 2d10s because I personally just think that's an easier way to keep track, but the cards are functional. They may take a little bit getting used to, but they certainly work, and they're a cheaper way to be able to do it, I'm sure, from the manufacturer. But whenever you play a card with this symbol as its main ability, this will trigger right away, and I'll get 4 authority back, even if I haven't lost any yet. And again, if I have another of this Trade Federation ships, these symbols, I get to draw a card. Now the interesting thing about these, though, is because you can use them anytime on your turn and they don't trigger right away, unlike a lot of other deck builders, if I were to play this Trade Escort and then play another card from this faction, I'd only get to trigger that second ability because I already played this card. However, in Star Realms, you can trigger both of them because you can do its main ability right away, but these anytime. So I could then draw a card from this one and then get whatever the other faction bonus is on that other card. You might say, I saw these sideways cards that look a bit different. What are these cards? Well, these cards are either bases or outposts, and you can tell by a base will have this little silver shield symbol here, and an outpost is going to say outpost and have this black shield here. Whenever you purchase one of these cards and they go through your discard pile and you eventually draw them again and you play them, there is no cost ever to play any cards in the game, which is kind of nice. But if I play this down in my turn, I have a base out, and then the turn I played it, all of my ships get one attack, and every turn thereafter that this card is out, I'm going to get this bonus. Now, any bases that come out, when you play them, you'll get the main action right away, and then unlike other cards that you have to use their main action right away, bases that you already have out, you can trigger at any point during your turn. Now this symbol here is how much health this card has. Now this is a pretty powerful card, it costs 8, I think that's the highest value. The other player can choose to use their attack on me to hit me directly and take away from my authority, or they can choose to attack my bases. Now if they attack a base, and let's say they have 6 attack, well, it's kind of pointless to attack this card, because like Magic the Gathering, cards gain back all of their health at the end of a turn, so that would be kind of wasteful and pointless to do, so they would attack me instead. But if they could get 8 attack, maybe they would want to spend it to get rid of this card instead of spending it to hit me, because this is a pretty nice card. There are also abilities that let you get rid of a base, which would even be a more efficient way to get rid of it. Now, the outposts work a little bit differently, though. The outpost, they must be attacked before anything else. So if I have this outpost out, my opponent cannot choose to attack another base or to attack me until my outposts are destroyed. Now if I have more than one, they can choose which outpost to attack, but if you ever played Hearthstone, this is kind of like Taunt, you can't attack anything else unless you get rid of the outpost. So they act as something that's just like a base, is going to give you an ability every turn, and then this card also gives you a faction ability if you have it. And that's one nice thing about bases, is that since as long as they're out, if you have just one ship of that type, you're still going to get to trigger its faction ability because you have a base already out. We talked about scrapping, where you can scrap a card with the trash can symbol for an effect. There are cards, usually in this machine cult faction, that allow you to scrap other cards. So this one, as soon as you play it, allows you to scrap a card in your hand or discard pile. And this is the faction that kind of specializes in being able to thin your deck. Not necessarily the card with the trash icon on it. I mean, you could do that, but you could use these to get rid of especially your early cards, or later in the game, just less valuable cards that you have purchased. So let's talk about what each faction does. The blob here, they're kind of the Zerg almost. They get in, attack hard and fast. So this ship that only costs 1 actually has a 3 attack. And then also, if you have another blob card out, it allows you to draw a card. This one, for just 3 costs, can get you up to 7 attack if you have another blob card. So for example, if I had this base out already where I played it on the same turn as these 2 cards, I would get to trigger all their abilities too. That's important to remember. So I'd get bonus to attack, draw a card, and then draw 2 more cards. So the blob don't necessarily specialize in drawing cards. They have quite a few. Most of the factions are able to draw some cards, but the blob are fast, efficient, and powerful attacking cards. Machine Cult, on the other hand, specialize in scrapping cards. So there are cards that have that scrap ability with the trash icon. The Machine Cult allows you to scrap any card of your choosing. So this one, when you play it, gives you 2 attack, and you may scrap any card in your hand or discard pile to get rid of those starting cards, or just weaker cards in general later in the game. The Stealth Needle's a cool ship, allows you to copy any other ship, and it gives you the symbol of the Machine Cult and the copied ship. The Mech World is one of my favorite cards. It doesn't do anything, it's just an outpost with 6, but it counts as every faction, so any ship you play, you will be able to trigger its faction ability. Speaking of drawing cards, the Star Empire has a lot of cards that let you draw cards, but also a lot of cards that force your opponent to discard cards. If you have a combination of these, you could potentially have your opponent only have 2, 1, maybe even no cards in their hand to start a turn. So these are kind of the annoying faction. And each faction has a bunch of cards to choose from, but here the Trade Federation, just a few examples. This is the card, the only cards that allow you to gain authority back. So these are kind of healing cards. So if you're playing more of a defensive long game, these cards are extremely useful. And also if you're playing against an opponent that's going heavy into the blob, these might mitigate some of that damage. Alright, let's talk about components. The box, kind of hard to shove everything back in here when you're done. Not the greatest box. You're probably going to want a different storage option. The rules, here are the 2-player rules. Not exactly a fantastic rulebook, but again, made so that the game can be affordable. And really, the rules aren't that complicated. You won't have to reference these a lot. So I really don't mind that the rules are done like this. And then there are the multiplayer rules. in order to play multiplayer, you're going to need, and the multiplayer doesn't have that many extra roles, so they can fit on one side pretty much. You do need 2 decks to play with 4, or 3 decks to play with a 6-player variant that they have available, which looks pretty cool. I have not played that, but you can also play kind of a hunter style, where you can only attack the player to your left, but you can attack, I believe, is the basis of the players of your right too. You can play free-for-all, or you can play what I think is the most interesting mode, the boss mode that it explains down here, where basically the boss is going to get extra cards and potentially extra authority based on the number of players that they're playing against. So if, for example, there were 2 raiders, they're called, playing against the boss, then the boss is going to get 50 authority as usual, but a 7-card hand size. So they're going to draw 7 cards every turn except for the first one. But so it's a really interesting way of playing, and this is a quick enough game. Often it will be done in 20 minutes. You could play, if you're playing with 3 players, have everybody beat the boss once, and best of 3, see who wins. And that's probably my favorite way to play the game. So what do I think about Star Realms? Well, there are a lot of other deck builders out there. This is similar in some ways to Ascension. Even though there's attack and the trade, you're really only buying the cards with the trade, as you're not using the attack to get cards, but you are attacking with them. But, and I guess it feels even more similar maybe to the DC deck builder, Lord of the Rings, and the 80 billion deck builders that use that same kind of rule set. But I like this one the best. What I like about it is the rules, again, are very simple, like those games, but the ways that you can combo, the ways you can go after, you're probably going to go after at least 2 factions, but sometimes going to have to purchase other ones. And that choice of what cards to get in this, I think is really interesting, the way those factions combine. And the first time I played it, I was kind of like, I don't know about this. My son and I were playing, and we were both getting out a lot of outposts, and we were gaining life. And he got me down to 22 kind of early, but then I got back up, and we were both, and I'm like, this game's going to take a long time. But then as the game builds, you're going to eventually put together these ridiculous turns where you're doing 22 damage in a turn or something like that. Not all the time, but if you get the right cards at the right time. And right about the time when I thought, is this game going to go on forever, all of a sudden, a couple more rounds and it was over. So the choices that you make, how you build, and each game can play out differently. We played another game where really, really quick, I think he was down to 2 health when he beat me, and it was under 20 minutes by probably quite a bit. But it plays out differently every time, and you might have favorite factions, but maybe you want to change it up, so you might go after certain factions, but maybe your opponent is. There are cards that let you scrap cards in the trade row there, the cards you can choose from to prevent players from getting cards. So for really, really simple rules, there's actually quite a few tactical decisions and the way that your deck builds up and kind of feels thematic. I'm playing this blob Zerg sort of attack deck, or the first game we played, one of the only ones that I won, my son was being really aggressive, and I was playing more getting bases and gaining life, and in the long run that eventually worked out. But another game where I tried that, it failed epically. So there's a lot of variety even with a small rule set, and I think it works thematically better than like the DC deck builder, where some of the combinations don't make sense. Here with the 4 different factions, what you're doing works pretty well. And out of the light deck builders, I think this might have jumped up to be my favorite. I actually like Arctic Scavengers quite a bit, but I like that when you add in probably at least 2 of the modules you can add on to it, the leaders, the buildings, or whatever. At that point, it's not as light of a game, but for a quick, light filler that allows you to play 2-player, but also, my personal favorite, that raid mode, it's not like Trieste, where, designed for 3 players or anything like that, but it's a really neat 3-player game, potentially more. So all the different combinations and versatility that you get in a small pack that only costs $15 retail, and if your friend has one or you end up buying 2, for more players, it's an investment I think is really worth it. So if you're fed up with deck builders, I get it. But if you're like me and you didn't go crazy and buy a bunch of them, you tried a bunch and weren't overly impressed, this is one that I'm definitely happy I purchased. And to me it offers just enough to keep it interesting and enough versatility with the different ways you can play it that I can imagine playing this game quite a bit. So thanks a lot for watching, and hopefully I'll talk to you guys soon. Alright, bye.